Today is August 3rd, 2022, and I'm here with World War II veteran Felix Belmont. I'm saying that correctly, right? Your last name? Belmont?
What?
Am I saying your last name right? Belmont.
Belmont, yeah.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist? Did you get drafted or did you enlist?
My first experience with the military was with Urban Military Academy in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And then for 8th grade, I went to public school. I went to University High School in Sawtell, is the name of the town. They had a junior ROTC unit.
Okay.
My father had an import-export business on Wall Street in New York, and some business people on the West Coast employed him to come out to the West Coast and do a survey of the state of Sonora, Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Sonora was dominated by the Yaqui River and consisted of a number of very large, what were called fincas, ranches. And a number of these were owned by Mexicans, but a number of them were owned by Americans who had developed them. And their product was wheat and flour, which was exported mainly to Cuba through New Orleans. A group of businessmen in Los Angeles employed my father to make this survey of Mexico, of Sonora, which is the northern, you know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we moved out to, first to Arizona and settled in the border town of Nogales.
Mm-hmm.
The result of this survey and so on was that my bear with me for a moment.
All right. Take your time.
If I can quickly lay here's what I want to show you. formed the Compañía Arrocera Rio Yaqui, and he built what turned out to be the largest rice mill in Mexico. This the main Mexican railroad from down Mexico City and so on, coming up north, was here, and they built a spur, and this is the spur that served the warehouses. The front here section of this warehouse and mill complex consisted of offices on the ground floor and living quarters for this second floor, and a number of the executives and so on were Americans.
That's cool.
Mexico, this town, Cajeme, which changed its name, the government changed it, to Ciudad Obregón, because Obregón had been, he was the president of Mexico, born and raised there. And he actually had a rice mill in Cajeme also. This was before the town developed. This became the main business drag in Mexico, in Cajeme. And where is it? I don't know if you can read the date on that, but this is a picture of my father.
Hmm.
Okay. The Depression came along and things went to hell, and my father came back to New Orleans and then came up to New York City and opened an import-export a merchant company right on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
His family had been involved in international trade going back to when traders came from the Far East to Spain, and then in 1892, I believe it was, Isabella, about the time of Columbus, kicked them out, and they went to Salonika, Greece, and then some of them went up to Constantinople. And my father had altogether 9 siblings, and they all got in international trade, and they spread out all over, including going to England and then to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them went down to New Zealand and all around and so on. Go ahead.
Let's start with your war service. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Neither. I got a commission as a second lieutenant, having served 4 years in Johns Hopkins University's ROTC.
And what year was that?
Well, I graduated in 1940.
So that would have been 1940.
Yeah.
Okay. So were you sent for training anywhere?
Yes. I graduated, got my commission, and was sent down to Fort Benning, which you may or may not know is the infantry school in Columbus, Georgia, and is world famous, actually.
All right. So what kind of training did you do?
As an infantryman.
Boot camp? Boot camp?
Hmm?
Boot camp?
Well, we got the same training, essentially like boot camp. Yes.
Okay. How long did you do that training for?
That training in peacetime was a year-long course, and they had it shortened down to 90 days, I think it was.
So it would have been about 3 months. Okay. And did you do any extra special training after you did boot camp or no?
I and a whole group of soldiers were sent out to the West Coast, to Seattle. We got on a ship and we went up to the Aleutian Islands.
Okay. So, and that was when the Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So where did you go to? You got on the East Coast to take a ship. How long did it take to get to the Aleutian Islands?
Well, let's see. My ship went to Adak, and then I was in Adak for quite a while, a few months, and then we got shipped out when the Japanese attacked Attu, which is you know where Attu is, the largest island.
Yeah.
And forgive me if I'm doing too much detail, but
no, I love as much detail as you can give me.
But we were shipped out to Attu, and a small contingent of the invasion of Attu was shipped to Shemya. And Shemya is an island which is about 5 miles long and only a half-mile wide. But it had no harbor, but it had one very interesting characteristic was the bottom of it was flat, and the engineers started building what was then considered the longest single airstrip in the world. And the reason for it was that up until then, the major source of air activity for the Army, because the Air Force was under the Air Corps, under the Army, the main source of bombing Japan was Adak, which is about halfway up along the chain. And it was beyond the range of fighter planes. And we had to get a base nearer Attu so that fighter planes could accompany the bombers when they made their daily bombing runs to Japan.
When you were on the troop ship, did you ever get seasick?
Pardon me?
Did you ever get seasick when you were on your way to the Aleutian Islands?
Did I get seasick? I get seasick on the Staten Island ferry. I mean, particularly subject to seasickness.
What kind of action did you first see when you first arrived in the Aleutian Islands on the first island you went to?
What?
With the Japanese action, like fighting?
I don't quite understand your drift.
When you arrived on the first island you mentioned,
Which was Adak.
yes, did you see any fighting against the Japanese in person?
Not on Adak, no.
But when you arrived to, you went to Attu.
But then they organized a combined operation between Canada and the U.S., and that's when we made the big attack on Attu. And they broke off a small group that went over to Shemya, which is this tiny little island, and the engineers, the 10th engineers, started bulldozing. They bulldozed the whole bottom of the island for this big airstrip.
Okay.
And I might add that it became, after the war, the refueling station for commercial aircraft flying from the States to Japan.
Okay. What was Attu like when the Japanese invaded? Or when the Japanese invaded, but after you guys went to take them out?
I'm not sure Well, the Japanese, you know, death and fighting was a religion with them, and so you didn't get any sympathy from them at all.
What infantry division were you part of? Were you part of an infantry division?
I wasn't, but the 7th Division, Army Division, was the division that made the big attack on Attu.
Okay. Were you in a Pacific unit that was on when that helped with Attu? So you would be a part of the 7th Infantry Division, correct? Because since you didn't, you weren't in the 7th, but they helped out. So that's what the division you'd say you were part of. I'm sorry if I'm not making any sense. But were you part of like any battalion or regiment while you were in the service, or no, as a second lieutenant?
Well, when we came back from the Aleutians, I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, for a while, and that's the famous infantry school.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, went up to, let's see, Fort Benning, and then where were we? We were in the Carolinas or someplace, I don't know. Yeah.
What were you doing in the Carolinas at the time?
Not for long.
But what kind of jobs did you have while you were there?
I was a infantry platoon leader.
Okay.
And then when the engineers, this is the important part of my, started to build this airstrip on Attu, they organized a provisional truck company, and our mission was to take the trucks down to the Chevy had no harbor. Take the trucks down to the beach to pick up all the way everything that was coming in from the States to supply them and distribute it around the island wherever it went. And I was actually I was still only a second lieutenant, and I was second in command of this big truck company.
So did you go to any other islands in the Pacific theater or no?
No, I never had any direct experience.
Okay, so you just mainly were...
They evacuated all of the Aleuts, the native Aleutian Island natives, from the islands back to what were essentially concentration camps on the mainland of...
Internment camps? Internment camps, that's what they call it?
Yeah, internment camp, yes, not an internment camp, exactly.
Okay. So...
And then when we came back to the States, as I said, we went to Fort Benning and
for
the rest of the war.
So when you were at Fort Benning, did you help train, or were you just stayed as the...
Well, we were training draftees. What happened was everything was geared to the preparation of D-Day in Europe. And up until that time, service in the paratroopers was strictly voluntary, but they weren't getting enough of them. So they made the paratroopers subject to the draft. And so they had to be, this greatly enlarged the training facilities necessary. And it was based in Fort Benning, Georgia, and we would get these new classes of draftees coming in every few weeks, and we had to train them. I mean, guys came in, had never fired a rifle before or anything, you know.
So where were you when Pearl Harbor happened?
Where was I in Pearl Harbor? When Pearl Harbor happened, this was when I was at Fort Benning. I was married at the time, and as a result, permitted to live off base. And my wife and I and a couple of other of our pals were driving home from work to our apartments in town in Columbus, Georgia, and it was just like civilian life going, you know. It was a little more than 9 to 5, but it was that kind of thing. And it came in over the radio. We had a car radio, and car radios were not the usual thing then. A lot of, you know, they were. And we were driving home, all of a sudden this whole big thing about Pearl Harbor being announced.
How did you feel about it when that happened?
Well, here we go, boys. I mean, this is the war. This is the war.
Did you ever expect it coming, or?
No, I think we were a little innocent about it.
Did you ever think since there was war actually going on in Europe at the time, did you think the war would go on longer if something happened? Or since you never expected it, you think the war would have just happened in Europe?
Didn't expect it.
So, where were you when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Were you still at Fort Benning?
Fort Benning, yeah.
And what were you doing at the time when you found out?
It was a Sunday, and we were visiting other officers in their apartment in town.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised to hear they dropped?
Yeah, it was a surprise.
How did you feel about them dropping it?
Well, the full significance of it hadn't been made available because censorship was so tight that you learned very little about it until later. Everything you learned about it came later, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know what an atom bomb was and so on.
Did they ever have any talks about you helping out with the invasion of Japan at all?
Say again.
Did you ever hear any word about you helping out with the invasion of Japan at all? If the atomic bombs were not dropped?
No, I don't remember that.
Well, what I know is the 7th Infantry Division would have actually went into Japan in the invasion.
I suppose so.
But when the war ended, what were you doing next?
Where was I think I was still at Benning. Fort Benning. No, we were up in a camp in Maryland or someplace there.
Did you feel happy the war was over?
Oh, sure, you know. But we were young kids, and it's all we had known. It was, you know, it was.
Mm-hmm.
We were getting out and sent home.
Oh yeah.
And fortunately, I had a job to go to because my father had this business in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and he immediately invited me to come there and learn the export business.
Okay.
I didn't have to go out looking for a job. I was extremely fortunate. And being his son, I'm not bragging or anything, but I got paid a little more than, you know.
And everyone else. So when were you discharged from the military?
Where?
Or when?
It was in the spring, I think.
Spring of '46?
Yeah, I think around there. I'd have to get my records out.
Sounds like you were in the war for the entire thing.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Did you ever make any friends that went off to battle?
I personally no. I was very, very lucky.
Well, that's good. You're very, very lucky.
I was very lucky. But I did have buddies who were sent over to Europe because the thing was still going on, and did not come back.
Yeah, it's sad. So, what was the what did Attu look like? Like, what did the island look like when you were on it?
It's just flat tundra, grass. There are no trees in the Aleutian Islands.
Okay.
Past the last tree in the Aleutian Islands is on Kodiak Island, which is located just at the beginning of the chain. Everything from that all the way out is high, tall grass.
Did you ever see, when the Americans took back Attu, did you ever see any of the remnants of the Japanese planes they had, or anything?
Yeah, we found some planes that were shot down and stuff. Yeah.
There was also I've heard they had the midget submarines in Attu, the Japanese midget submarines. You might have not heard about it, but they had a lot of them captured and put on the land for salvage.
Yeah.
And the Japanese midget submarines actually were at Pearl Harbor, and they helped with the Pearl Harbor attack. So that's why I mentioned it. I think that's all my questions I have. Thank you, Felix, for doing this. I appreciate it. Have you ever been interviewed before about your service? Have you ever been interviewed before about your service? Like talked about your service with anyone?
No, not really.
So this is your basically like first time.
I think so.
How does it feel talking about it after 77 years?
It's a long time ago.
A lot of people didn't like to talk about it afterward because they saw horror, saw hell.
But I didn't have any problem with it. As I say, I was lucky. And then I got out and I had a job, that was a big thing. What are you going to do? Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. That's very interesting. Huh. Well, I appreciate it.